name is Kudzai Mpakairi from the African Leadership University. I have graduated from two universities, the University of Zimbabwe, and I'm completing my master's actually completed my master's at the University of the Western Cape here in South Africa. So presently I'm in South Africa, but also working for the African Leadership University where I'm a researcher there. I am happy to be joining I'm happy for everyone who's joining today. And I hope as much as possible, this presentation will be as insightful as it can be. And I hope that it can also be as engaging and enlightening as I wish it will be. And please, along the presentation as I'll be presenting, please feel free to interact, ask questions along the way as we go. I know it's a bit tough and a bit different, but apparently there's this whole new paradigm of trying to make sure that everyone is engaged throughout the presentation, and I would not want anyone to miss out or then feel at the end of the day that they can't ask something because it was presented like 10 hours ago or something like that. Anyway, I can start now, Johan, right?
Go for it.
Thank you, Johan. Thank you. For today, I will be talking about how we can use geoinformation or geospatial technology in bridging the gap between science and policy. So specifically, my presentation is titled Africa, using geospatial information to help bridge the policy and decision-making gap. Like I said, I'm from the African Leadership University, specifically School of Wildlife Conservation. And today, this is my talk, and I'm sure the recording will be available like what Joanna said. So to start off, I would like to talk about the 21st century environmental problems. So please, everyone, get ready. I would like everyone to be engaged now. I'm going to show a couple of pictures, and I hope everyone will be able to type in. So I'll show one picture, and then you type in and mention the type of environmental problems that you can see from the picture so that we can everyone can get involved in this whole presentation. So we're going to start off with this one. Let's see in the chat box. If there's someone who's interested, to tell us what this is all about in the chat box. From the picture, I can see there's wind and there's water and some devastation of some sort. Come on, guys. Someone in the chat box. There we go. We have Christine talking about pollution in water. Someone wants to take up Christine on that one. Come on, guys. Flooding. Close, very close. Getting there. Lynette, you're definitely close. Someone there. Increase sea water level rises, hurricanes. Holly, it's very close. Okay, that's good. That's exactly. This is, I think, Zolo, you take it. This is a storm that happened in Mozambique, a cyclone that happened in Mozambique. Let's go to the next one. Next slide. Can you identify? This one should be easy. Come on, guys. This one should be easy. This one should be easy. Everyone should get this one. More or less similar to the first one. Yes, cyclone. Thank you, Tugafa. Sorry, some of the names I'm going to pronounce them wrongly, but please bear with me. And this one. I think Lynette, no, Christine, you're definitely going to be close now. Holly takes it. This is pollution, water pollution. And then another one there. Who's going to take it today? Yes, Christine said it first. Yes, who's going to take it? What is this? What are we seeing there? Drought. Are you sure that's drought? I see some trees and stuff like that. Yes, there we go, Ahmed. Deforestation. Thank you, Christine. And then that one should be easy as well. That one should be easy. Desertification, air pollution. There you go, Cheryl. That's amazing. Christine is on fire today. Again, this is the last one. 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 Come on, guys. This usually people talk about this. This usually happens in Asia or East, in the Middle East. Landslide, close. But in the Middle East, it's a clue. Middle East earthquake. There we go. So basically, it seems like everyone has an understanding of some of the environmental problems that we face overall in the 21st century, or that are pertinent, that are ongoing in the 21st century. So some of these environmental problems, like everyone has mentioned, from floods, cyclones, deforestation, landslides, flooding, pollution, and stuff like that, they are just intense and they're coming down on us like never before. We also need to understand that, as that might be the case, is given all the environmental problems that are there, governments all over governments all over have decided to actually focus on what we call sustainable development goals. And at some point they were called Millennium Development Goals. But what is important, or the over understanding, is that we need to make the world a better place. And in terms of the sustainable development goals that are there, some of the pertinent sustainable development goals that are there, that are important or of interest to conservationists. Every goal is important to conservationists, I must say, but there are some goals that are very important or that are very pertinent to conservationists, that include marine resources, oceans and seas, climate change, water and sanitation, and ecosystems and biodiversity. These are some of the issues that we talk about each and every day in the conservation field. So, as we talk about these issues, how do we talk about these issues? Which are the current methods that are being used to then understand or to look at these issues or sustainable development goals and everything else? Some of the current methods that are ongoing include statistics. I'm sure everyone knows a little bit about statistics. Statistics is basically the practice or science of collecting and analyzing numerical data in large quantities. And this includes collecting, classifying, presenting, interpreting descriptive statistics or inferential statistics. But I know that most people are more common with collecting data. You know, people are talking about a sample, a population. So probably people, when they talk about statistics, what they're more concerned about is collecting data. And then we also talk about presenting the data, the graphs, the line graphs, the charts, the pie charts, everything. That's some of the things, or some of the most important issues that people can relate to when they talk about statistics. Then we go on to interpreting our data, trying to make sense of the data. This is some of the methods that have been used when trying to look at the sustainable development goals. So what's next? What next after this? Which new technology can we then infuse with the current technologies that are there? Because statistics is a field that has been there for long and it has been relied upon. That's why you see when you talk about any phenomenon on Earth, people talk about how significant it is and everything that goes along with it. So now, as we understand statistics, we have a new technology that we can actually integrate into everything and make statistics even way, way better. So this is what? GIS and remote sensing, geoinformation, the science of collecting geospatial data, processing it, sharing it, and delivering it. More or less similar to statistics, but it's an infusion that allows the collection of location data throughout. So now this is a science. So there is a system, but what is most important is the science. Most people understand the system. I think even when we had the mapping clinic last week, it was focusing on how we can use the system. But what is important on top of the system is the science. The science allows you to use that system across different fields. So the science allows us to then capture geographic data and then process the geographic data and include statistics as we process the geographic data, share the geographic data, and then inform the decision and policymakers throughout the whole process. So as we do that, we have to understand two things, that there are two communities that are separate. Already you can see that as we're trying to inform the decision makers and the governments, we have two communities that exist. We have the geospatial community and the statistical community. So like I say, the statistical community is broad and has been in existence for, I don't know since when. But the geospatial community just came in like a couple decades ago, and then it's trying to revolutionize things. So for the geospatial community to actually integrate and make sure that we inform decisions, we have to make sure that we integrate the geospatial community and the statistical community. That's why you hear, when you go through and you understand GIS, you talk about geostatistics and everything that comes with GIS technologies. So when we integrate the geospatial community and the statistical community, it allows us to provide more evidence for decision makers, so that when they then decide to make any policy or put across any policy, that policy comes from an informed decision. And in terms of the levels of funding, it becomes easier for the decision makers to fund for the research or to fund that policy, because some of the issues that are ongoing in Africa are that sometimes there is a problem, but there is not enough evidence for the decision makers to set aside funding for that problem. So then it means that one of the key things that is lacking is the evidence, or if the evidence there is not concrete, or if the evidence is concrete and people are not acting, then probably there's something missing. So our goal at the end of the day is just trying to bridge the gap between policy and science, policy and decision makers, policy and the next person who needs to use the data. This can actually trickle down to the community level, to the household level, delivering that information to the household level. So what next now? When we talk about the bridge, let's now talk about the bridge. Let's now look at the bridge. We're talking about bridging the gap between the two systems. So which bridge can we bridge when we're talking about ecosystems? For example, we have an issue, an environmental problem, and this entails fires. I'm sure over the past, over the past couple of years, there have been a lot of issues that have been ongoing in terms of fires, either in Southern Africa or in Australia. So it means that from a science perspective, we know that it's a problem. But from a geospatial perspective, how can we deal with the problem? How can we deal with the problem? Now we go on and map those fires and look at the fire frequency. The map that you see there is for the Kavango-Zambezi Trans-Frontier area, but specifically the Zimbabwean component of the Zambezi Trans-Frontier Conservation Area. And it was looking at the fire frequency across the landscape. So as you look at the fire frequency across the landscape, you then begin to understand that these areas are the ones that are at risk more when it comes to fires, and how many households are within that area. So the moment you then try and understand how many households, because from a statistics perspective, you're going to simply look at the number of people, but the way is very important. Trickling down, remember, trickling down to the household. How many households are going to be affected? It goes beyond the statistics, and because it's geospatial analysis or geospatial information goes down to the household level to actually identify where and when these fires are likely to, where these fires are likely to be more devastating. And then once we do that, we create a pathway for policy to be initiated. So by doing that, by having a problem and then bringing forward the evidence, we create a pathway, we create a bridge for policy. For example, this is the Environmental Management Act of Zimbabwe, which was enacted in 2002, and several amendments have been put in that act that try and force people to make sure that they do not ignite fires unnecessarily, and they've been putting fines to make sure that people do not put anyone in danger, because fires are a pertinent issue or pertinent problem in Zimbabwe in the dry season. And then we go ahead, let's look again at another example, say water pollution. Some streams all over the world, and we have also an issue to do with microplastics and macroplastics all over the world. And this situation is blowing in at levels that are not known to mankind. Like recently, because of COVID, we've in a situation when it comes to masks and the disposal of those face masks, and some of them are being disposed openly, and then at the end of the day, they wash into oceans or river systems or water systems, and this affects aquatic environments within those systems. But then understanding this problem, we need concrete evidence to show the areas that are likely to be at risk from this type of pollution, be it microplastic, plastics, from E. coli or from cholera or typhoid or any of the diseases that are water-related diseases. We need evidence, and this evidence needs to transcend from a statistical perspective, and it needs to move to a geospatial perspective so that it shows the risks that are related or that are involved. And then that's where we come in. And then we then decide to say, what, you know what, this is the evidence. This evidence shows the overall water risk in terms of pollution, which areas are likely to be more polluted. And then the government, by doing that, we then create a pathway for the government then to have what? To create policy, like the National Water Act of South Africa, which was enacted, I think, which was put in place in 1998, but several amendments have been put to the act to make sure that pollution, when you talk about water pollution, is kept at the minimal as we can. So now, given these two examples of understanding environmental problems and understanding how the geospatial community can feed in and create a pathway and improve the level of evidence that is available, what next do we then do? What next? Today, I want us to quickly look at an exercise so that we all have an understanding of how the geospatial community can influence decision makers, can influence the policy makers when making decisions through evidence, because the evidence does not lie. Evidence, once evidence is there, evidence does not lie. Like I said, this now need to look at an example on how we can then create evidence, or not create evidence, sorry, but to provide evidence in any situation. So for example, Mozambique is one of the regularly flooded countries in the world. And I think in terms of floods or cyclones, I think they happen like once in 2 years or probably yearly. And I think the frequency has actually increased. And if you look at the cyclones, they pose a major risk to all inhabitants of Mozambique, and especially the people that stay along or that reside or habitate the coastal areas. And this affects close to 2 million people yearly within those within the coastal along the coastal regions. And this alone puts an intense strain on the gross domestic product and the infrastructure in Zambia, because you build the road today, the next year the road is not there from the cyclone. You build a road today, the next thing is not there because of the cyclone. You build a clinic today, the next year it's not there because of the cyclone. So now let's see how best we can inform decision makers. How best can we inform decision makers from a policy perspective? Because from a policy perspective, we know that Zambia has a high flood frequency. So now what next? So like I said, looking at the flooding and the flood frequency in Zambia, you will understand that like back in the days around 1970s up to 1997, the flooding frequency in Zambia was not intense. But from 1999 from 2000, 2018, the flood frequency and the number of affected people has increased rapidly. You look at the likes of Cyclone Helene, Cyclone Idai, a lot of cyclones, Cyclone Edgar, a lot of cyclones have been reported, and they have caused devastating effects on Mozambicans. So now, how, like I said, the question still remains, how then can we inform decision and policymakers from a geospatial perspective? How then can we do that? So we need to provide what evidence to show that this is how best we can we can inform and provide evidence for the policymakers. So, like I said, some of the effects of what has been ongoing in Zambia. We talk about Cyclone Kenneth, and that you can imagine if it was your house that is probably left there after cyclones do this. This was in 2019 after Cyclone Kenneth, and then this was also another part of Mozambique during the whole Cyclone Kenneth. And you can imagine if this was your home or your mother's home or anyone. So it's some of the things you have to be also sentimental about it and trying to understand some of the situations and how best we can make life better for the rest of the world. But by doing that, we do that through informing decision makers. So we also have tropical cyclone Anna that was recently experienced in Mozambique, and this was flooding. And then although people's livelihoods continued, but in other parts of Mozambique, it was not nice because other households were affected. And this also happened, I think, in Madagascar and some parts of Mauritius. And this is how terrifying some of these environmental problems are. But like I said, our role is to inform the decision makers, because right now I'm sure everyone understands the Paris Agreement and everything that was set out in the Paris Agreement. But the moment you then talk about the Paris Agreement without putting forth evidence that aligns or that supports the need for decision makers to actually come through and put in place policy or decisions that actually regulate some of the problems, then it becomes an issue. It becomes a back and forth situation. Sometimes it's about the evidence and trying to make sure that our evidence is constantly aligned each and every time. There's no contradictory evidence, but we constantly improve our evidence. And as a geospatial community, for example, if we look at Mozambique, we can think of what we call overlay analysis in a GIS system. Overlay analysis, we can, for example, if we're talking about Mozambique, right? Looking at Mozambique, if we are to predict or to even look at the flooding risk levels in Mozambique, we can use, say, at least 7 geospatial layers. And these geospatial layers could be elevation, land cover, transportation, administrative boundaries, water, the addresses, and the positioning. So, for example, how are these layers important, or how do they relate to flooding risk? For example, let's look at the elevation. We know that people who residing in low-lying areas are more at risk as compared to people who reside in elevated areas. So definitely that will be important to identify those areas. And then land cover. We also know that areas that are not vegetated are more at risk when it comes to flooding and the subsequent environmental problems that come after flooding. When you have trees and you have vegetation that is in place, it holds the water. And for example, the wetlands, they act as a sponge to actually absorb the water. And if that is not there within that community, and then there's a cyclone or flood, then it makes it even harder for those wetlands to even absorb or the vegetation to try and reduce the rate of the water washing into the inland. And then transport services. When we talk about transport services, we can look at how which evacuation routes are likely to be easy. Even though an area could be flood risk, but if it's close to evacuation routes, it might not be as much of a risk, because the moment the flood is incoming, then people can easily evacuate. But if there's no transportation and then a flood is incoming, then definitely the risk is going to be very high. And then we can look at the administrative boundaries and look at where, when, and the populations and everything is, how many people, the population density, how many people live in there, and everything associated. We can look at the water channels, the hydrology within that area. Is the infrastructure in place? What's there that can actually sustain, or how many rivers are there? Or what if the rivers floods? Is there any river that is large enough to contain the water in such a way that the water does not flood, the area does not flood? Are there any dams that we need to open and everything like that? That then comes into place. And then the addresses of the people. Where are the people located? Where are they? And then the positioning and the connectivity of the least path of how the risk is going to transcend if it comes back. If like, for example, the cyclone comes, if it does come through, how then can we put everything in place and analyze it and from Uh, so this would be more or less of how overlay analysis would come through and then inform us on flooding risk. And in terms of the practical tutorial of when we do flooding risk, Ahmed, I'm not so sure when. That was probably, I hope in the next coming series we'll probably have something similar to that in terms of overlay analysis. But it then allows us to then identify those crucial areas that are likely to be flooded. So the moment we have these layers and then we have everything in place, it then allows us then go forth and try and map the flood risking areas, the flood risk areas. For example, in the map, in the picture, you can clearly see that the coastal areas, like we mentioned earlier on, are the areas that are at risk when it comes to flooding in what? In Mozambique. And this was this work was done by the UN Habitat, and you're showing where some of its activities are in terms of trying to rescue and try and assist people, especially when it comes to flooding. And also you can see that along the major rivers, that's where also flooding also occurs. And then understanding this, like I said, from understanding where the flooding risk is, then allows us to put in place policy, because the policy interventions become very, very important after understanding this, because now we are not merely talking about flooding in Mozambique, we're talking about the risk, and even going a level up and not just talking about the risk and talking about where the risk is. That is the main difference. We're not just talking about the risk, but where is the risk? Because the moment the where is important, the where is what most people do not know about. They know about the how, but the where is what they do not know about. So geospatial community allows us to then give the way, to answer the way. The way is, where is this risk likely to be? Where is it high? Where is it low? Where should our funds be focused on? Where should we inject more funding? Where should the humanitarian assistance be? Which areas can the government intervene? Which areas can the private sector intervene when it comes to flooding? And then those are the questions that the geospatial community now answers. And as we do that, we provide evidence. Like I said, we could bridge the gap and make sure that our evidence is concrete enough for the buy-in from the decision makers and the policy makers. You're doing an owner's research on it. I understand. Another, I think you can try the USGS website, United States Geological Survey website. I think it has some data on elevation, and yes, elevation is a very critical element that shows flooding. And I think you can also look at some of the research that has been done overall, but elevation, yes, is very critical because, like I said earlier on, the assumption is that, or the working assumption is that if people are residing in low-lying areas, then they are more likely to be at risk when there's flooding as compared to people who reside in areas that are elevated. So in terms of the elevation data that we have two data sets that are commonly used with the ASTRA data set and then the shuttle radar data set, and then the SRTM, that's the shuttle radar data set. That is, I think, it's the best with the 30-meter resolution. And I think the data was captured in 2002, I think somewhere there, but over time it has been corrected. And then the moment you just type the shuttle radar topography mission, I think the data is freely accessible and available, and you get it, I think, from just going to Google shuttle radar topography mission, and then the data will be available. It will give you several links, and then if you're lucky, probably your country already has a repository for the data, and then you could actually get the data. And then you can, it becomes easy for you to look at flood potential or flooding risk in an area. So now that we have understood where the flooding risk is, so how then do we inform policy? Like at the end of the day, like I said, we now need to inform what? We now need to inform policy. How do we then inform policy? Policy interventions come through, for example, we can have the disaster risk policy. The disaster risk policy, for example, would actually inform and say that we need to resettle people in low-lying areas. We need to have a budgetary allocation. of this much. Probably last year we used this much when it came to the flooding, and then this time around we need to use this much. And then we can actually engage insurance companies to say that you need to insure people, so that people need to buy in terms of insurance, so that today you build your house and you insure your house against flooding. When the cyclone comes and then there's flooding, your house might not be there, but since the insurance companies will be there, it will be easy. Although it will cause an economic downturn in the long run, but people at least will get something rather than relying on the government, because the people will still look at the insurance companies rather than relying on the government for sustenance after the event, post-event recovery. And then we can talk about the protection of the wetlands, like I said, because these act like sponges and they help in such situations because they can actually take in the water. Of course, it will depend in terms of the amount of water and everything else, but they will act as sponges that would actually be able to help during this during those situations where flooding exists. And then we can always talk about investing in water engineering technology and on levies and everything like that, to say how can we make sure that if a cyclone comes, the water does not affect the inhabitants of coastal areas. If a flooding comes, how can we make sure that the water, as the flooding comes, the houses are built in such a way that they can resist the flooding, or the foundation is strong enough, or the houses are built in a certain way that they allow water to pass underneath, but does not affect, and then it does not change anything, and then people are saved. And those kind of technologies, those are some of the technologies that the government would then try and invest in. So overall, as you can see now, the evidence is very important. When you talk about flooding, without the evidence from a geospatial perspective and a statistical perspective, it just becomes rhetoric. And rhetoric say it does not convince the government. But the moment you take the government and then you sit it in and then say, these are some of the things that are going to happen. We have the statistics here, and then we have the geo statistics also there. The geo, obviously, this is a combination of both, because the geo comes in with information, and we look at the blending of the two, and we provide the evidence to the government and say that this is not just about how much we are going to lose economically, but this is about how many people are going to be affected. And we can even avert that the chaotic situation scenario that comes after the cyclone, because we know the flood, the areas that are likely to that are at risk of flooding, and we can simply go there before the flooding and try and put up or evacuate people before the floods, or even resettle people before the floods. So how can we do that? Now, giving that information allows the geospatial community to bridge the gap between policy and information. So that capability of the geospatial community to bridge the gap between science and the decision makers and policy makers is invaluable, I must say. It's invaluable, and not so many fields are able to actually do that in terms of bridging the gap and providing evidence for the policymakers and decision makers. And I think this is the end of my presentation, which took 30 minutes. I hope the next 30 minutes, next 15 minutes, of course, sorry, we'll be able to discuss and share on other insights or questions that you guys have throughout the questions that you had throughout the presentation. Thank you, Johan.
There were a couple of questions, Kudzai, in the comments box, specifically about where data elevation can be got from. Now, I wasn't sure if you kind of covered it mostly in your presentation, but if you could just do a few sentences to say, okay, where do you get elevation data, and is it free? So especially for Africa.
Thank you, Holly, for that one. When it comes to elevation data, I think the most reliable or the most accessible data that we have is the digital elevation model data that shows that can be used as elevation, or that is actually elevation. And this data is freely available. Like I said, there are two main sources that people use or refer to. And we talk about in terms of the data, there's the ASTER data, and then we have the shuttle radar topographic mission data. And this data, like the ASTER and the shuttle radar, SRTM shuttle radar topographic mission data, they are all hosted on, if you go onto Google and type in United States Government, Geological Society, USGS, USGS, or you can type in USGS Clovis, GLOVIS, USGS Clovis, or Earth Explorer. Those are some of the sites that are hosted by the Geological Society, or I'm not so sure it's Geological Society or Geological, because it's USGS. I don't know, somewhere there. But anyway, they host this data, and then you can always look for the data on those websites. And the data, like I said earlier on, Holly, it's free. It's very free. The data is very free, and you can simply go there and then download the data and process it and use it as you will.
Beautiful. Thank you very much. Now, Kudzai, we had a question from Ahmed about practical tutorials to understand overlay analysis. So I'm actually going to change your question a little bit, Ahmed, because yes, overlay analysis is super important. And I wonder, Kudzai, if you could do a bit of research to find a short practical activity that somebody has created online for overlay analysis. It might even just be 5-10 minutes, that in the next time when we send out the email, we could share that link with the students, so that it's sort of a short tutorial on overlay analysis. Or maybe you could create your own, just to get an idea of where do you begin and to do 1 or 2 analysis. Does that sound like something, Kudzai, you'd be keen to do?
Definitely, Wally, definitely, I'll do that.
Okay, so that's, Ahmed, we'll have to come back to you on that. So thank you for your question or message, and we will get back to you. So there have been a few more questions. Nzolo, how do you validate a flood model when you have less than reliable rainfall data, and when your digital elevation model is in low resolution, like say 30 meters?
That's a good question, Zolo. I must say, when it comes to 30 meters, I think that's the best data that when it comes to digital elevation model, that's the best data that we can get. Unless, of course, we have you have LiDAR data, or you can use the global LiDAR data by GEDI, also hosted by NASA. The recently launched LiDAR data. But still, it comes with its errors and everything like that. But what's very important overall is that when it comes to a model and hydrological models, I'm sure you understand, Zolo, from the fact that when it comes to models, the best we can do is to put forward our model is a model that is only showing the risk. The moment we try and put forward and explain or use our results from the model is what is actually happening, or areas that are likely going to flood, it becomes a bit biased towards our that's what most people talk about is confirmatory bias, because already you know where these areas, or you also want that model to work. So I would advise that when it comes to modeling, if possible, this is how I would do it personally. If I were you, if possible, you have a model that you have. Use that model, predict for flooding for a year that flooding actually occurred, right? For example, we're talking about Mozambique, right? You build a model for flooding, and you build it for 2022 or 2019 for Mozambique. And if the model predicts well for that year, it then means that same model, if you predict it for 2023 or going forward, it will likely be better because it has been able to actually predict for the known. Because some of the times that when we talk about validating the model, sometimes it can be actually, it can be very, very hard because remember, like in a situation you're talking about less reliable data, and then we have elevation that is also not the best. But what we can then do is try and test the model on the known. I think this is something that most climate modelers do, what they call hindcasting. They try and hindcast for the future. And then when they do that, they then take if the model is capable of simulating everything that has happened before, then it means that the climate model is capable of predicting for the future. So what you can do if you want to validate your model, you can take it, build it for a particular year or particular time period where you know that there was flooding, and then you validate from that using that data that you found during that time frame. And then when you're satisfied with the model that is predicted well, you can then test it on the next data set, and the next data set will probably be the future. I'm sure if you have done, I'm not so sure which type of model you'll be using, a machine learning model or a specifically designed hydrological model, or whatever you'll be using. But if you've used probably statistical models, you understand that when you come to validation, you have several methods. You have the splitting, you have the cross-validation methods. For example, let's say you're talking about the data splitting, the data partitioning of the percentages. You can build your model using data from say 2019, when you know there was flooding, and then validate it with that data using cross-validation. And then you test that the new data set on a future on a futuristic event, or for the unknown, which would probably be 2022 or something like that. And then you only do that after being satisfied with the results from the known, because the known is 2022. So once the known is concrete enough and is actually predicting well, it means that if you take this test data and then use it for the future data set or for the unknown, it will likely be able to perform well, and your model will be better in that regard.
And I do just want, is my volume okay? I'm hearing my own voice.
Yes, your volume is okay.
Okay, so one thing I wanted to add in, and Kudzai, you can also come in on this, but something that is very important, especially when you say less reliable rainfall data, we in generation are predisposed to think that all information comes from technology and the internet, and that's where we find it. If you are doing research in an area, something especially rainfall data, a lot of our parents, our grandparents, all of the farmers, they collect rainfall data, and they've been collecting it for years and writing it down on a piece of paper. So this is where citizen science becomes important, because you call your community into action to digitize the data that is handwritten, and that forms a more reliable picture that you can then digitize in your maps and build models from. So Kudzai, maybe you can just add a bit on that as well.
No, I actually agree with what you're saying, Molly. I think, you know, when it comes to science or providing information, it's and I don't want to briefly to be biased towards science, but when you provide information, the world over has actually agreed that we need to move towards a more interdisciplinary approach rather than a straitjacketed approach or a unilateral approach. And we need to integrate all fields that exist. So citizen science is very important, indigenous knowledge systems, existing technologies, so that you have at least a robust data set, like what Wally said, from the citizens. Integrating everything will definitely make everything better.
Okay, I'm actually, Kudzai, going to hand over to Johan, because I have another set of students coming in another event. To everybody, and Johan will take over and close the session, but I'm sure there might be a few questions. So thank you, everyone.
Okay, thank you, Ollie.
Thanks, Ollie. Any questions remaining at the moment?
I think Kenneth had asked a question. Do you want to use the mic, Kenneth, or should we use it from the chat box?
Kenneth, you are welcome to unmute and talk to us if you would like to.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that wonderful presentation. Am I audible enough? I'm sorry, I can't turn on my video at the moment.
Yes,
sure.
you're audible.
Perfect. So I'm Kenneth Rama. I'm in Portsmouth in the UK. I'm a master's student of crisis and disaster management. So it's a really wonderful session. My question is on with regards to application of drones. So drone technology has been accepted recently to be used to collect geospatial data. So just wondering how that is playing out, especially in your areas of work in the Southern Africa region, considering the operation cost, lack of training or capacity for those in the geoinformatics sector. Okay, actually get this and make it how is that playing out? Because I know it was used in for the first time the WHO used it in Mozambique during Cyclone Idai, and there's now ongoing development and even research to use it further in many other disaster rescue or disaster management and humanitarian response.
Yeah, that's a very good question, Kenneth. I must say I agree with what you're saying, that when it comes to the operational cost and the human resources capacity in terms of using drones and UAVs, unmanned aerial vehicles, it's just a mess. And we are just trying to get there, but I don't know when we'll get there. But one method that I can advise that can be useful when it comes to using UAVs is, I'm not so sure. I mean, there is obviously you can always get a better version of a drone, but I'm sure from here in South Africa, I've seen people sell the cheap drones, low quality drones, probably flies, say for example, 6 meters or 30 meters for or maybe 30 minutes, flies for 30 minutes, 15 minutes. So you can buy that DJI for probably here in South Africa, it goes for maybe 5,000. It's quite a lot, right? But I'm saying a second hand, you buy it for 5,000. It gives you 15 minutes. You have 4 batteries, so that means like you've got close to an hour from the 4 batteries. And then ideally, you use that drone, and then you try and customize the images as much as you can. But I agree with you; it's one of those areas that we might leverage on in terms of using drones for flood mapping and other imaging aspects of geoinformatics, and drones can actually assist in a way better in a more advanced way as compared to our conventional satellites. So, but the thing is that we cannot simply talk about drones and then we talk about the high resolution or the expensive, the $10,000 drones, the $15,000 drones, because how many of those drones are we going to need to cover, for example, a protected area? But what we can do is probably invest in the low quality drones and then use those to leverage as much as we can from them, and then try and use that data, because from the more expensive the drone, the more likely it is going to be that you need, because the resolution is going to be high. So it means you also need a supercomputer to process that imagery. And believe me, once you get a supercomputer, once you have that, like I said, you have that drone, very expensive, meaning the resolution is going to be very high, meaning you're going to need a supercomputer to process the image, meaning that it's a whole lot of other costs that are going to come through. But luckily, if you have a low quality drone, the low quality drone allows you to have an image that is probably more or less better than Landsat. So then it means that we can invest now in training. If we invest in training after maybe a week of training, and for most people who are already in the GIS community, for a week of training, they'll probably be acquainted with the use of that image. Of course, and then for people who are outside of the geospatial community, they will then have to do more. But what is important still is that we can leverage on the low quality drones at the moment as we try and make sure that we have enough information, because clearly we need them, but we don't have the money as well in terms of the investment. So how can we then balance the two? We can always leverage on the low quality drones so that everything comes out well.
Great. That's great innovative thinking. In Africa, we make a plan.
Yes, 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 yes.
Make it work.
Yes.
Any other questions?
Titus had asked for my email. I've sent it through Titus. I think, yeah.
If that is if that's it for this afternoon, anybody else? Last chance. Please feel free. Kudzai is still here. I'm still here. We are happy to hang in a few minutes more. Otherwise, I'm just going to thank Kudzai for a brilliant presentation. Thank you for the time and the work that you put into it. We really appreciate it, and I'm sure the students learned a lot. Unfortunately, we had to tweak the time a little bit because Kudzai is a working man, and he also had to attend to work commitments today, but we really, really appreciate this.